This is the story of John Ellison and his wife Emma Ellison. There are marriages that end in fire, and there are marriages that end the way a candle goes out. Not with a gust, but with a slow, quiet suffocation of air. John and Emma Ellison had built something that looked, from the outside, like a life. 14 years of shared meals, shared debts, shared silences that had once felt comfortable and had slowly become something else entirely. The tension between them was not the kind that crackling argument, but the kind that lives in the space between a question asked and an answer given too quickly. Emma had always needed to feel seen in a particular way, admired, pursued, chosen, and John had spent years believing that loving someone steadily was the same as loving them well. He was wrong about that, though he would not understand how wrong until it was too late to matter. The Ellisons lived in a brown brick house on Pembridge Lane, the kind of street where neighbors waved from driveways and nobody asked real questions. They had a routine, the way long married couples do, built from small compromises accumulated over years, until neither of them could remember who had given up what, only that the life they shared was functional and mostly quiet. John worked in civil engineering, bridge assessments, load calculations, the unglamorous infrastructure of things that held weight. He was methodical by nature, a man who trusted what he could measure. He was 41, medium height, with the kind of face that didn't age dramatically but had settled into a permanent expression of mild attentiveness, as though he was always slightly listening for something. He was not an ungenerous husband. He remembered birthdays. He came home at reasonable hours. He did not drink too much or spend recklessly or disappear into televised sports. He believed these absences of failing were in themselves a form of devotion. Emma was 39. She had spent the past 7 years working in event coordination for a mid-sized hospitality company, and she was good at it in the way people are good at things that require them to manage other people's needs, while quietly deferring their own. She was warm in public in a way that sometimes surprised people who caught her alone. Not cold, exactly, but reserved, watchful. There was something in her that was always taking stock. They had no children, which had been Emma's decision, then a mutual one, then a source of grief that neither of them had properly processed. By the time they reached their late 30s, the subject had calcified into one they did not touch, not because it had been resolved, but because picking at it cost too much, and they had both, in their separate ways, decided the cost was not worth it. On a Wednesday evening in late October, John came home to find Emma standing at the kitchen counter, her phone face down beside the cutting board, her posture carrying a tension she released too deliberately when she heard the door. "You're early," she said, without turning. 40 minutes. Traffic was clear. He set his bag down and went to the refrigerator. "How was the Hartley event?" "Fine. Long. The florals were wrong, but we made it work." He poured himself a glass of water and watched her for a moment. She was chopping bell peppers with the focused energy of someone who needed something to do with their hands. He noticed the phone, its screen down, and noticed that he noticed it, which was a different thing. "Anything good?" he asked. "Just work emails. Rachel panicking about the Donnelly booking." He nodded. He believed her, or he chose to. It was not always easy to tell the difference. Dinner was pasta with a sauce from a jar, which they ate at the kitchen table with the television off because Emma had once said she didn't like eating in front of screens, and it had become a rule neither of them questioned. They talked about the Hartley event and about a crack John had found in the garden wall and about whether his mother would visit at Christmas. The conversation was not unpleasant. It was simply surfaced, a thin covering of words over whatever was below. Afterwards, Emma washed up, while John sat with a book he was not really reading. She came through at 9:30 and said she was tired, and he said he'd be up soon. She kissed the top of his head, which she did sometimes, and the gesture was tender and familiar, and he received it the way he received most tenderness, with a kind of settled gratitude that did not press further. He went to bed at 11. She was asleep, or appeared to be. At 2 in the morning he woke needing water and went downstairs in the dark. On the kitchen counter, Emma's phone screen had lit with a notification. He was not a man who snooped. He had never felt the need, or had never let himself feel it, but the screen was there, glowing in the dark kitchen, and he was standing 2 feet away, and the name on the notification was simply D, and the message beneath it said, "Still thinking about last night." John stood in the kitchen for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car moved slowly past. He did not pick up the phone. He turned and went upstairs and lay beside his sleeping wife and looked at the ceiling until his mind quieted enough to let him believe it was nothing. A colleague's nickname, an inside joke, something with a story he didn't have yet. He fell asleep telling himself that the simplest explanation was usually the true one. He was right about that too, just not in the way he hoped. November arrived and the days shortened, and John found himself paying a kind of attention to his marriage that he hadn't exercised in years. It was not jealousy, exactly, or not yet. It was more like the feeling of noticing a sound you cannot name, something just beneath the ordinary frequency of things, and being unable to stop listening for it. Emma was not dramatically different. That was what made it difficult. There was no sudden coldness, no obvious withdrawal. She was still present at dinner, still asked about his work, still laughed at the same things she'd always laughed at. But there were moments, small and almost imperceptible, when he would look at her and find her somewhere else entirely, her eyes holding a private thought she didn't share. She began working late more often, not every night, and never without a reason. The Donnelly event, the winter catalog launch, a corporate booking that had spiraled. John had never had cause to question her professional life, and he did not question it now, not openly. He simply filed the information away with the careful neutrality of a man who was trying very hard not to become someone he didn't want to be. One Friday she came home carrying a new scarf, deep burgundy, silk, and when he asked about it, she said a client had given it to her as a thank you. She draped it over the coat hook in the hallway, and they did not discuss it again. He saw it every morning when he left for work. He learned not to look at it. What he noticed more than the absences was the way Emma had begun managing him. It was subtle. The kind of behavior that, described to someone else, would sound like consideration. She would ask about his day with the focused interest of someone running through a checklist. She would initiate affection in small, deliberate ways, as though administering doses. She remembered things he'd mentioned, a meeting, a difficult colleague, a project deadline, and asked follow-up questions with the precision of someone who needed him not to feel neglected. He understood, somewhere below the level of articulation, that this was not the same as intimacy, but he did not know what to do with that understanding, so he accepted the gestures and told himself he was lucky. In the second week of November, he had lunch with his older brother Patrick, who ran a landscape gardening business and was the kind of person who said what he thought without apology. They met at a pub near the canal, and Patrick talked for a while about a difficult client and then looked at John across the table and said, "You seem like you're carrying something." John looked at his pint. "Marriage stuff," he said, which was more than he'd intended. Patrick waited. "I don't know," John said. "I think I've been too steady, like I've confused being reliable with being present." He turned the glass on the beer mat. "She used to tell me I made her feel safe. I think somewhere it became boring. Have you talked to her?" "I've tried. She says things are fine." Patrick said nothing for a moment. Then, "Things being fine and things being good aren't the same thing." John drove home that evening in the gray dusk and sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going in. Through the kitchen window, he could see the light on and Emma's shape moving behind the glass. He watched her without her knowing, the way you sometimes look at someone you love and feel the strange distance of truly seeing them. That night, after she had gone to bed, he sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. He was not sure what he was looking for. He was not the type to search a spouse's email or install tracking software. It felt like a violation of something he was not ready to violate. Instead, he sat in the kitchen for an hour, thinking. He thought about the phone in the dark with Dee and still thinking about last night. He thought about the scarf. He thought about the way she had kissed the top of his head, and whether tenderness administered from guilt felt different from tenderness given freely, and whether he would be able to tell the difference even if it did. He closed the laptop without opening anything. The next morning, Emma came downstairs in good humor, made coffee, asked about his weekend plans. She was bright and present and the version of herself he had married, and he sat at the table watching her and felt simultaneously reassured and more afraid than before, because the thing he was beginning to understand was this. People who are hiding something do not always become absent. Sometimes they become very, very careful. In January, 3 months after the kitchen and the phone and the burgundy scarf, John hired a private investigator. He did not arrive at the decision quickly or without shame. The shame was part of it. The admission that trust had already failed. That he was paying someone to confirm what he could not bring himself to ask directly. He told himself he only wanted certainty, one way or the other. He told himself that if the investigation turned up nothing, he would feel relief and recommit to the marriage without reservation. He believed this was true mostly. The investigator was a woman named Carol Finch, recommended through a solicitor. John had spoken to obliquely about property matters. She was in her mid-50s, practical and matter-of-fact, and she did not ask John to explain his reasons in detail. She told him her process, quoted her rates, and said she would be in touch. 11 days later, she was. The file she sent contained photographs and a written timeline. The man's name was Daniel Faro. He was 44, divorced, and worked in hospitality sales, which was how he and Emma had met. They had been meeting, with documented regularity, since late September. Hotels, mostly, once a flat in Southwark that appeared to belong to a friend of Daniel's. The photographs were not graphic. They did not need to be. There was one of them walking together, Emma's arm through his, her face turned up and laughing in a way that John had not seen in a long time. That photograph cost him more than the others. He sat with the file for 2 days before he decided what to do. He did not shout. He did not pace the house rehearsing speeches. He went to work on both those days and did his job, and came home and behaved normally, and in the evenings he was very quiet in a way that Emma attributed, if she noticed at all, to work stress. On the third day, a Saturday, Emma was making tea in the kitchen when John came in and sat at the table and said, simply, "I know about Daniel." She went still. The quiet that followed was absolute. The kettle finished boiling and clicked off, and the steam dispersed, and neither of them moved. Emma set down the mug. Her hands were steady. He noticed that. She turned to face him, and her expression was not the expression of someone caught. It was the expression of someone who had been dreading a particular door and now found it open. "How?" she said. "It doesn't matter." She sat down across from him. He could see her composing herself, not manufacturing innocence but actually gathering her thoughts, which was something. She was not going to pretend. "I didn't plan this," she said. "I'm not interested in the origin story." She flinched slightly. "I know you're not, but I need you to hear something, not as an excuse, Emma, but because you deserve an honest answer." She looked at her hands. "I have felt, for a very long time, like I was invisible inside this marriage, not unloved. I know you love me, but unseen. You are a good man, and you are steady, and you do not ask for much, and you give me very little trouble, and I started to feel like a piece of furniture that was well maintained, and that is not your fault entirely. I know it isn't. I know I didn't say what I needed. But when someone looks at you like you matter, not like you're reliable, like you matter, it's very difficult too." She stopped. John looked at her for a long time. "I know," he said quietly. She blinked. "I know I stopped seeing you. I know it was a failure. I've thought about it a lot these past months." He was not angry in the way she had expected. His voice was flat and careful. "What I can't get past is that you had a choice. Every time you made a choice. And you looked at me and you lied, consistently for months. That's not a failure of attention. That's a decision about who I am to you." Emma was quiet. "I'm not going to shout at you," he said. "I'm not going to list what I've given this marriage. I'm tired of counting things up." He stood. "I need some time away from here. I'll stay at Patrick's. John, I'm not ending anything tonight. I just can't be in this house right now." He left the kitchen. She did not follow him. She sat at the table and listened to him move through the house and gather some things, and then heard the front door close. And then there was only the house and the cooling tea and the particular silence of a space where something has just irrevocably changed. He stayed at Patrick's for 3 weeks. During that time, Emma texted regularly, not excessively but steadily. The messages were measured, thoughtful, free of the kind of emotional coercion he might have expected. She asked how he was. She said she was in counseling. She said she had ended things with Daniel, which she had, and which he could verify, which perhaps she knew. She said she wanted to talk when he was ready and that she would not push. He read every message and replied to few. Patrick did not offer opinions. He provided the spare room and occasional dinners, and once, watching television, said, "You know you don't have to decide anything yet." And John said, "I know." And they left it there. At work, John moved through his days with the automatic competence of someone who has separated function from feeling. His colleagues noticed nothing. He attended meetings and signed off on reports and drove home to Patrick's, along the same canal road he had driven for years. And sometimes, in the car, he would feel something close to grief, though not for the marriage exactly, for something simpler, for the version of himself who had gone to bed 14 months ago beside his sleeping wife. seen the lit phone and the name D and the message still thinking about last night, and had turned back to bed and chosen not to know. In February, he moved back into the house. He told Emma this was not a decision about reconciliation. He told her he needed his own space and his own routine, and that they would have to figure out what came next without pressure from either side. She agreed. She had rearranged her work schedule so that they were rarely in the house at the same time during the week, which was either consideration or avoidance, possibly both. They were polite. Occasionally they ate dinner together, and the conversation was careful and sometimes almost warm. He could see that Emma was trying, not performing, but genuinely working at something, reading herself more honestly, being less managed in the way she presented herself to him. He appreciated this without knowing if it was enough. He was not sure what enough would feel like. In March, they attended a joint session with Emma's counselor, a soft-spoken man named Peter, who asked good questions without steering toward any particular outcome. John found the session useful in a limited way. It clarified things he already knew, placed language around states he had been carrying imprecisely. What it could not do was return him to the certainty he had once felt. That feeling, not of passion exactly, but of being anchored, of the house on Pembridge Lane being without question where he belonged. Emma's birthday was in April. She had always liked her birthday, liked the ceremony of it, the gathering of people, the feeling of being the center of a room in a way that was sanctioned and warm. In previous years, John had organized dinner parties, booked restaurants, arranged for friends and family to come. This year, she planned her own gathering, a dinner for 20 people at a restaurant they both liked in the city. She invited him. He said he'd come. He almost didn't. He stood in the hallway at 7 o'clock in his good jacket, keys in hand, and felt the weight of what the evening would ask of him. To stand beside Emma in front of people who knew them as a couple and perform some version of normal. He thought about Patrick, who was coming. He thought about Emma's friend Rosalind, who had texted him once during the separation, with the careful message, "I'm sorry, I had no idea," which he had believed and still believed. He went. The evening was not what he feared, and not what he hoped. Emma was gracious and present, and the meal was good. They sat at opposite ends of the table, not by arrangement, but by the natural drift of the seating, and he watched her across the candles and flowers, receiving birthday toasts and laughing and being herself, the warm public self, the one she was good at. And he felt something that was almost fond and removed, like looking at a photograph of a place he used to live. At the end of the evening, in the car park, when most of the guests had gone and they stood waiting for a cab, Emma said, "Thank you for coming." "Of course," he said. She looked at him. Her breath made small clouds in the cold. "Are you okay?" "I think so," he said. "Are you?" She considered the question seriously, which he appreciated. "I'm working on it," she said. "I don't think I really understood, until all this, how much I'd been managing my own unhappiness instead of naming it. That sounds like an excuse, and I don't mean it as one. She stopped. "I think I'd been dishonest with myself for a very long time, and you were the person nearest to that." He nodded. "I know that's not enough," she said. "I know you know that." The cab came. They rode home in silence that was neither hostile nor comfortable. It was simply honest. They separated formally in June. The decision came not from a single conversation, but from the accumulation of small ones, quiet exchanges in the kitchen, brief and careful, in which they were both unusually truthful with each other and which revealed, in the aggregate, that what remained between them was something real and something insufficient at the same time. They were not enemies. They were not strangers. They were two people who had loved each other in ways that had both succeeded and failed, and who had run out of the particular kind of hope that holds a marriage together. The house went on the market in August. They were practical about it in a way that surprised the solicitor, who was accustomed to the corrosive legalities of couples in conflict. They divided things without much dispute. Emma took most of the kitchen things because she cooked more. John kept the books and the outdoor furniture. There were very few items that either of them fought for, which said something about the life they had accumulated in the ways it had always been more parallel than shared. On the last day in the house, a warm Friday in September, John arrived after work to collect his remaining boxes. Emma was already there, loading her car. They worked for an hour in the same space without speaking much, passing through empty rooms that still smelled like themselves, like the particular aggregate of two people's years. He paused once in the doorway of the kitchen, which was stripped back to white walls and bare counters. And he thought about the years he had stood in that room, the cups of tea and the late dinners and the morning light on her face when she was still half asleep. And he held all of it for a moment without judgment. It had been a life. It had been a real one. Outside, loading the last box into his car, he heard Emma come down the path. He turned. She was carrying the burgundy scarf. He had forgotten about it completely. She held it out and said quietly, "I don't want this. I thought you should decide what to do with it." He looked at it in her hands. "Throw it away," he said. She nodded. Neither of them moved for a moment. "I don't know how to say this without it sounding like I'm asking for something," Emma said. "But I am genuinely sorry. Not for being unhappy. I was unhappy, and I know that was real. But for the way I handled it, for the lying, for the specific quality of how I lied, which was deliberate and careful, and I knew what I was doing and I did it anyway." She looked at him steadily. "I think about that a lot." John leaned against his car. The September afternoon was very still. "I know," he said. "I believe you." "Do you?" She stopped. Adjusted. "Are you okay?" "In general, I mean. Not right now." "I think I'm going to be," he said. "I think I understand some things better than I did. About what I'd stopped paying attention to. About the difference between not causing trouble and actually being there." He looked down at the pavement. "I don't think I was fully present. I want to do better with that." She nodded. Her eyes were bright, though she didn't cry. "I hope you find someone," she said. "Someone who makes you feel like you're worth being worried about." He looked at her for a long time. "I hope the same for you." The scarf went in the bin at the end of the drive. They said goodbye in the way of people who no longer have a particular word for what they are to each other. He drove away first, and she watched until he turned the corner. And then she stood alone in front of the house that was no longer hers, and felt the full, necessary weight of everything she had lost, and everything she had chosen, and the long, uncelebrated distance between those two things. Later, driving along the canal road in the early evening, the water going gold beside him, John thought about what it means to love someone steadily and whether steadiness alone is a kind of disappearing act. He thought about all the ways a person can be present in a marriage and absent from it at the same time, and how both of them had managed that particular failure in their own particular ways. He was not angry. He was not, in this moment, sad. He was something more quiet than either. A man in his early 40s driving toward a life he did not yet fully know, carrying the ordinary remnants of a marriage that had been real and flawed and finished, which is to say, carrying what most people carry, and learning, at last, how to feel the weight of it honestly.